Greetings from Exam Heist. We have identified important exam questions. Practice these important questions 2-3 times to get 100% success in exam. Subscribe and comment, share PDF in the below comment section to get PDF of these 40 important questions. If you want to access full dump, please visit www.examheist.com. We have 24/7 support available for your doubts and exam queries. Question 1. You have an Azure Active Directory Azure AD named contoso.com and an Azure Virtual Network named VNET1. To VNET1, you deploy an Azure Active Directory domain services Azure AD's managed domain named litwerinc.com to VNET1. You plan to deploy your Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool1. You need to ensure that you can deploy Windows 10 Enterprise Session hosts to Pool1. What should you do first? Option A. Modify the settings of the litwerinc.com DNS zone. Option B. Modify the DNS settings of VNET1. Option C. Add a custom domain name to contoso.com. Option D. Implement Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Modify the DNS settings of VNET1. Question 2. You have the devices shown in the following table. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop for client access to remove virtualized apps. Which devices support the remote desktop client? Option A. Device 1 and Device 2 only. Option B. Device 1 and Device 3 only. Option C. Device 1, Device 2, and Device 3. Option D. Device 1 only. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Device 1 and Device 3 only. Question 3. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop to meet the department requirements shown in the following table. You plan to use Azure Virtual Desktop host pools with load balancing and auto scaling. You need to recommend a host pool design that meets the requirements. The solution must minimize costs. What is the minimum number of host pools you should recommend? Option A 1, Option B 2, Option C 3, Option D 4. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option C 3. Question 4. Your company has a main office and 2 branch offices. Each office connects directly to the internet. The router in each branch office is configured as an endpoint for the following VPNs. A VPN connection to the main office is site-to-site VPN to Azure. The routers in each branch office have the quality of service QoS rules shown in the following table. Users in the branch office report slow responses and connection errors when they attempt to connect to Azure Virtual Desktop resources. You need to modify the QoS rules on the branch office routers to improve Azure Virtual Desktop performance. For which rule should you increase the bandwidth allocation? Option A Rule 2, Option B Rule 3, Option C Rule 4, Option D Rule 1. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, Rule 3. Question 5. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. The deployment will use existing virtual machines. You create an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. You need to ensure that you can add the virtual machines to the host pool. What should you do first? Option A. Register the Microsoft Desktop Virtualization Provider. Option B. Generate a registration key. Option C. Run the invoke as VM run command. Option D. Create a role assignment. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Generate a registration key. Question 6. You are designing an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment to identify the network latency between the locations where users reside and the planned deployment. What should you use to identify the best Azure region to deploy the host pool? Option A, Azure Traffic Manager. Option B, Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator. Option C, Azure Monitor for Azure Virtual Desktop. Option D, Azure Advisor. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator. Question 7. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool 1 in the ESTAS region. You have a storage account named Storage 1 that contains FS-Logix profile containers. In the ESTAS region, you have a shared image gallery named SIG1 that contains a virtual machine image named Image1. Image1 is used to create new session hosts in Pool 1. You plan to deploy a new Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool 2. To the South India region, you need to implement a session host deployment solution for Pool 2 that meets the following requirements. Image1 must replicate in the South India region. The session hosts in Pool 2 must be based on Image1. Changes to Image1 must be available in the South India and East US regions. What should you include in the solution? Option A, create a new shared image gallery named SIG2 in the South India region. Upload a copy of Image1 to SIG2. Option B, create a new Azure storage account named Storage2 in the South India region. Copy Image1 to a shared folder in Storage2. Option C, from SIG1, update the replication for the latest image version of Image1. Option D, configure geo-redundant storage GRS replication of Storage1. Copy the VHT file of Image1 to the FS-Logix profile container. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option C, from SIG1, update the replication for the latest image version of Image1. Question 8. Your company has 60,000 users. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. You need to recommend a storage solution for the FS-Logix profile containers. The solution must provide the highest possible IOPS and the lowest latency desktop experience. What should you recommend? Option A, Azure Data Lake Storage. Option B, Azure NetApp Files. Option C, Azure Blob Storage Premium. Option D, Azure Files Standard. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, Azure NetApp Files. Question 9. Your company has a single office and has 40 employees. You are planning an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. The estimated user workloads are shown in the following table. Half the users of each workload type work from home. All the users who work from home do not establish a VPN connection to the office. Approximately how much bandwidth is needed between the office and Azure to support the planned workloads? Option A, 9.5 megabits per second. Option B, 55 megabits per second. Option C, 110 megabits per second. Option D, 220 megabits per second. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, 55 megabits per second. Question 10. Your network contains an on-premises Active Directory domain that syncs to an Azure Active Directory Azure redundant. The domain contains the domain controllers shown in the following table. The DNS servers are configured to forward requests to an external DNS service. You create a new virtual network named VNET2 that is peered to VNET1 and has gateway to runs it. Enabled. You plan to implement an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool in VNET2. The session hosts will be joined to the Active Directory domain. You need to configure DNS to meet the following requirements. Ensure that Azure Virtual Desktop users can resolve on-premises servers and Azure resources. Ensure that Azure Virtual Desktop remains operational. If a DNS server fails, minimize administrative effort. What should you configure? Option A. The DNS settings of VNET2 to use Server 2 and Server 1. Option B. The DNS settings of VNET2 to use the Azure DNS service. Option C. The DNS settings of the virtual machines to use Server 2 and Server 1. Option D. The DNS settings of the virtual machines to use the Azure DNS service. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. The DNS settings of VNET2 to use Server 2 and Server 1. Question 11. You have the Azure Virtual Desktop deployment shown in the following table. You plan to deploy a new host pool as shown in the following table. You need to ensure that you can deploy the host pool. What should you do? Option A. Add a lock to the existing host pool. Option B. Stop and deallocate one of the currently deployed virtual machines. Option C. Submit a support request for service and subscription limits. Option D. Change the proposed virtual machine size for the session hosts to D4S version 3. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option C. Submit a support request for service and subscription limits. Question 12. You have an Azure subscription that contains 500 users. The users are assigned Microsoft Office 365 E1 licenses. You deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop solution that contains Windows 10 multi-session hosts and streams a customer remote app named App1. You need to ensure that the users are licensed to stream App1. The solution must minimize costs. Which license should you use? Option A. Microsoft 365 E5. Option B. Office 365 E3. Option C. A remote desktop services RDS. Client access license. CAL. Option D. Windows 10 Enterprise E3. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. Windows 10 Enterprise E3. Question 13. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that contains an Azure Compute Gallery. The Azure Compute Gallery contains an image definition named Definitions. Definition contains the following image versions: 1.0.0, 1.1.0, 1.2.0. You need to ensure that when a virtual machine is created from the Azure Compute Gallery, the 1.1.0 image version is used by default. What should you do? Option A. Select Exclude from Latest for image version 1.0.0. Option B. Select Exclude from Latest for image version 1.2.0. Option C. Apply a lock to image version 1.1.0. Option D. Apply a tag named Default to image version 1.1.0. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B. Select Exclude from Latest for image version 1.2.0. Question 14. Note: this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool that contains 5 session hosts. The session hosts run Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. You need to prevent users from accessing the internet from Azure Virtual Desktop sessions. The session hosts must be allowed to access all the required Microsoft Services solution. You configure the RDP properties of the host pool. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, no. Question 15. You deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool 1. You have an Azure storage account named Store1 that stores FS Logix profile containers in a share named profiles. You need to configure the path to the storage containers for the session hosts. Which path should you use? Option A, Store1 block or Windows net profiles. Option B, https://store1.file.windows.net/profiles. Option C, Store1 file core Windows net profiles. Option D, https://store1.blob.core.windows.net/profiles. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option C, Store1 file core Windows net profiles. Question 16. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop session host virtual machines based on a pre-configured master image. The master image will be stored in a shared image gallery. You create a virtual machine named Image1 to use as the master image. You install applications and apply configuration changes to Image1. You need to ensure that the new session host virtual machines created based on Image1 have unique names and security identifiers. What should you do on Image1 before you add the image to the shared image gallery? Option A, at a command prompt, run the set computer name command. Option B, at a command prompt, run the sysprep command. Option C, from PowerShell, run the rename computer command. Option D, from the lock screen of the Windows device, perform a Windows autopilot reset. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, at a command prompt, run the sysprep command. Question 17. You have a shared image gallery that contains the Windows 10 images shown in the following table. You create an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that has the following settings: host pool name, pool 1 location, West US host pool type, personal. Which images can you use for the session hosts? Option A, image 1 only. Option B, image 1, image 2, image 3, and image 4. Option C, image 2 only. Option D, image 1 and image 2 only. Option E, image 1 and image 3 only. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option E, image 1 and image 3 only. Question 18. Note: this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool that contains 5 session hosts. The session hosts run Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. You need to prevent users from accessing the internet from Azure Virtual Desktop sessions. The session hosts must be allowed to access all the required Microsoft Services solution. You configure rules in the network security group NSGL linked to the subnet of the session hosts. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A, yes. Question 19. Note: this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool that contains 5 session hosts. The session hosts run Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. You need to prevent users from accessing the Internet from Azure Virtual Desktop sessions. The session hosts must be allowed to access all the required Microsoft Services solution. You configure the address space settings of the virtual network that contains the session hosts. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, no. Question 20. Note: this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool that contains 5 session hosts. The session hosts run Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. You need to prevent users from accessing the Internet from Azure Virtual Desktop sessions. The session hosts must be allowed to access all the required Microsoft Services solution. You modify the IP configuration of each session host. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, no. Question 21. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. The pool contains session hosts that run Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. You connected to a remote desktop session on pool 1 and discovered an issue with the frequency of screen updates. You need to identify whether the issue related to insufficient server, network, or client resources. The solution must minimize how long it takes to identify the resource type. What should you do? Option A, from within the current session, use the Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator. Option B, from Azure Cloud Shell, run the Get as Operational Insights workspace usage commit and specify the default profile parameter. Option C, from Azure Cloud Shell, run the Get as WVD user session commit and specify the user session need parameter. Option D, from within the current session, use Performance Monitor to display the values of all the remote FX graphics, frames skipped, second counters. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D. From within the current session, use Performance Monitor to display the values of all the remote FX graphics, frames skipped, second counters. Question 22. You have an Azure Active Directory Azure AD named contoso.com. You use a user account named admin1 to deploy an Azure Active Directory domain services Azure ADDs. Managed domain named contoso.com to a virtual network named VNet1. You plan to deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool1 to VNet1. You need to ensure that you can use the admin1 user account to deploy Windows 10 Enterprise session hosts to Pool 1. What should you do first? Option A, add admin1 to the RDC administrators group of contoso.com. Option B, assign the cloud device administrator role to admin1. Option C, assign a Microsoft 365 Enterprise E3 license to admin1. Option D, Change the password of admin1. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. Add admin1 to the RDC administrators group of contoso.com. Question 23. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool1 that contains the following: a linked workspace named Workspace1, an application group named Default Desktop, a session host named Host1. You need to add a new data disk. What should you modify? Option A, Host1. Option B, Workspace1. Option C, Pool1. Option D, Default Desktop. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A, Host1. Question 24. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You need to create a host pool. The solution must ensure that during periods of low CPU usage, credits can be accumulated and then used to raise performance above the purchased baseline during periods of high CPU usage. Which virtual machine series should you specify when you create the pool? Option A series. Option B, D series. Option C, H series. Option D, B series. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D, B series. Question 25. You have an Azure Active Directory domain services Azure ADD's domain named contoso.com. You have an Azure storage account named Storage1. Storage1 hosts a file share named Share1 that has share and file system permissions configured. Share1 is configured to use contoso.com for authentication. You create an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool1. Pool1 contains two session hosts that use the Windows 10 multi-session plus Microsoft 365 apps image. You need to configure an FS-Logix profile container for Pool1. What should you do next? Option A. Install the FS-Logix agent on the session hosts of Pool1. Option B. From Storage1, set allow shared key access to disabled. Option C. Configure the profiles setting for the session hosts of Pool1. Option D. Generate a shared access signature SAS key for Storage1. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. Install the FS-Logix agent on the session hosts of Pool1. Question 26. You have an Azure storage account that contains the generalized Windows 10 disk images shown in the following table. You need to create an image that will be used to deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop session host. Which disk should you use? Option A, disk 1. Option B, disk 2. Option C, disk 3. Option D, disk 4. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A, disk 1. Question 27. You create the virtual machines shown in the following table. You need a source virtual hard disk for new Azure Virtual Desktop session host deployments. The source operating system must have user-specific and machine-specific information removed. Which virtual machines can you use as the source? Option A, source VM3 only. Option B, source VM1 only. Option C, source VM1, source VM2, and source VM3. Option D, source VM1 and source VM2 only. Option E, source VM2 only. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option E, source VM2 only. Question 28. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You plan to use FS-Logix profile containers. You need to recommend the solution that will be used to store the containers. The solution must meet the following requirements. The containers must be stored on solid-state drives, SSDs. Minimized administrative effort, minimize cost. What should you recommend? Option A, Azure NetApp files. Option B, Azure File Standard. Option C, Azure Blob Storage Premium. Option D, Azure Files Premium. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D, Azure Files Premium. Question 29. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Host Pool 1. Host Pool 1 contains Windows 10 session hosts and the application groups shown in the following table. You need to assign an instance of a Windows 11 desktop application group to users. What should you do first? Option A, create a scaling plan. Option B, create a new workspace. Option C, add a session host to Host Pool 1. Option D, create a new host pool. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option D, create a new host pool. Question 30. You have an on-premises network and an Azure subscription. The subscription contains the following virtual network name: VNet1 address space 10.10.0.0/16 subnet name subnet1 address range 10.10.0.0/16. You deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool that contains 10 session hosts to subnets. You plan to deploy a VPN gateway to VNet1 and provide the session hosts with access to the on-premises network. You need to ensure that you can deploy the VPN gateway. What should you do first? Option A, modify the address range of subnet 1. Option B, add a subnet named gateway subnet to VNet1. Option C, modify the address space of VNet1. Option D, associate a network security group NSG to subnet 1. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, add a subnet named gateway subnet to VNet1. Question 31. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that contains a host pool. The pool has the following settings: resource group, RJ1 host pool name, pool 1 location, E-stars host pool type. Pool. The deployment contains the workspaces shown in the following table. For pool 1, you plan to create a remote application group named App Group 1. In which workspaces can you register App Group 1? Option A, Workspace 1 and Workspace 2 only. Option B, Workspace 1 and Workspace 3 only. Option C, Workspace 1 only. Option D, Workspace 1, Workspace 2, Workspace 3, and Workspace 4. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, Workspace 1 and Workspace 3 only. Question 32. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. You are deploying storage spaces direct to a cluster that will store FSLogix profile containers. The cluster will not use Cloud Witness. What is the minimum number of virtual machines required for the cluster? Option A 1, Option B 2, Option C 3, Option D 4. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B 2. Question 33. You have an Azure Compute Gallery that contains the Windows 10 images shown in the following table. You create an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that has the following settings: host pool name, pool 1 location, West US host pool type, personal. Which images can you use for the session hosts? Option A, image 1 only. Option B, image 2 only. Option C, image 1 and image 2 only. Option D, image 1 and image 3 only. Option E, image 1, image 2, image 3, and image 4. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A, image 1 only. Question 34. You have an Azure AD tenant that contains a resource group named RG1. RG1 contains the resources shown in the following table. Your on-premises network has an IP address range of 192.168.100.24. Users on host 1 can successfully connect to the resources on the network. You add a new on-premises network that has an IP address range of 192.168.110/24 and contains a subnet. The subnet contains an application server named App1. Users report that host 1 cannot connect to App1. You need to ensure that the users on host 1 can access App1. What should you modify? Option A. The connections settings of VPNGW1. Option B. The subnet setting of VNet1. Option C. The configuration settings of LNGW1. Option D. The DNS server settings of VNet1. Option E. The RDP properties of the host pool. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option C. The configuration settings of LNGW1. Question 35. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment that contains a host pool named Pool 1. Pool 1 contains 10 session hosts that were deployed by using an Azure Resource Manager (ARM) template. You discover that Windows licenses were not applied to the session hosts. You need to use a PowerShell script to update the licenses. Which glitch should you include in the solution? Option A. Update AZ-VM. Option B. Update as WVD Desktop. Option C. Update as WVD Host Pool. Option D. Update as WVD Workspace. Option E. Update as WVD Session Host. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. Update AZ-VM. Question 36. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool 1 and an Azure storage account named Storage 1. Storage 1 stores FSLogix profile containers in a shared folder named Share 1. You create a new group named Group 1. You provide Group 1 with permission to sign into Pool 1. You need to ensure that the members of Group 1 can store the FSLogix profile containers in Share 1. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. Which two privileges should you assign to Group 1? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. Option A. The storage blob data contributor role for Storage 1. Option B. The list folders /read data NTFS permissions for Share 1. Option C. The modify NTFS permissions for Share 1. Option D. The storage file data SMB share read role for Storage 1. Option E. The storage file data SMB share elevated contributor role for Storage 1. Option F. The storage file data SMB share contributor role for Storage 1. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option C. The modify NTFS permissions for Share 1. Option F. The storage file data SMB share contributor role for Storage 1. Question 37. You have a Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. You need to install Microsoft middleware for Azure on the session hosts. What should you do? Option A. Add an extension to each session host. Option B. From a group policy object GPO. Enable Windows 10 security features. Option C. Configure the RDP properties of the host pool. Option D. Sign into each session host and install a Windows feature. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A. Add an extension to each session host. Question 38. Note: this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool 1 that is integrated with an Azure Active Directory domain services Azure duties. Managed domain. You need to configure idle session timeout settings for users that connect to the session hosts in Pool 1 solution. From an Azure ATDS joined computer, you modify the AADDC user's GPO settings. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A, yes. Question 39. Note: this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool 1 that is integrated with an Azure Active Directory domain services Azure duties. Managed domain. You need to configure idle session timeout settings for users that connect to the session hosts in Pool 1 solution. From an Azure ATDS joint computer, you modify the AADDC computer's GPO settings. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option A, yes. Question 40. Note: this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool named Pool 1 that is integrated with an Azure Active Directory domain services Azure duties. Managed domain. You need to configure idle session timeout settings for users that connect to the session hosts in Pool 1 solution. From the Azure portal, you modify the session behavior settings in the RDP properties of Pool 1. Does this meet the goal? Option A, yes. Option B, no. Choose the correct answer. Correct answer is option B, no.